What's going on? We got another Neon Mushroom Commander gameplay video for you guys. So let's not waste any time. We're just going to go ahead and jump straight into what decks everyone's playing and opening hands. Returning from the last game, we have Ajdin playing his Lord Windgrace deck, and he keeps a hand of 6 with Red Elemental Blast, Deathrite Shaman, Sylvan Library, Verdant Catacombs, Cinderglade, and a Command Tower. Next up, we have Jake playing his Kalamax, the Stormsire deck, keeping a Breeding Pool, Island, a Baral Chief of Compliance, a Rune Chanter's Pike, Reiterate, Comet Storm, and a Thrill of Possibility. Then we have Guy playing his Zacama Primal Calamity deck, and he's keeping a Forest, a Mountain, Rites of Flourishing, a Blind Obedience, Thematic Compass, and a Helm of the Host. And I'll be playing my Nicol Bolas, the Ravager deck, keeping a 7-card hand with Castle Vantress, Wooded Foothills, Marsh Flats, Nightscape Familiar, Spark Double, Increasing Ambition, and Nicol Bolas, God Pharaoh. I won the die roll, so I'll start by drawing a card, dropping Wooded Foothills as land for turn, passing over to Ajdin, who drops a Command Tower and a Deathrite Shaman. Jake's going to draw a card, drop Breeding Pool, and then Guy's going to follow suit by drawing and playing a Mountain as land for turn, passing to me. At the end of Guy's turn, I'll crack Wooded Foothills for a Blood Crypt tapped, untap and draw my card for turn. Then I'll play a Mountain as land for turn, tapping 2, and playing Nightscape Familiar, passing over to Ajdin. Ajdin will untap his land, draw a card, and then he will also play a Mountain as land for turn, tapping out to play a Sylvan Library. Then I'll move to combat and attack Jake for 1 with Deathrite Shaman. Passing the turn to Jake, Jake's going to go ahead and untap, draw a card, and he's going to drop an Island as land for turn. He's going to tap out as well to drop Baral, Chief of Compliance, passing to Guy, who draws, plays a Forest, and drops Thematic Compass, passing the turn to me. Starting my third turn, I'll untap and draw a card for turn. Then I'll play Marsh Flats as land for turn, cracking it, paying a life, putting Watergrave into play untapped, paying 2 life, and then I'll cast my Commander, triggering, making Jake discard Comet Storm, Ajdin discard Cinderglade, and Guy discards Blind Obedience. Then I'll attack Guy for 1 and pass over to Ajdin. We'll untap and resolve his Sylvan Library trigger. He's going to choose to take no damage and only pick up 1 of the cards that he saw off the top 3. He's going to play a Forest for turn and just pass the turn over to Jake. After untapping, Jake unfortunately has no actions and passes to Guy. So Guy's going to untap both of his lands, draw for turn, and then he's going to play Canopy Vista as his land for turn. He'll tap out, casting Rites of Flourishing, and play an additional land as a Plains and pass the turn to me. Before he can do so, Ajdin taps a red for Red Elemental Blast, destroying Nicol Bolas the Ravager, and then I will untap and start my next turn. After untapping all my permanents and drawing a card for turn, and an additional card off of Rites of Flourishing, I'll play Castle Vantress as my land for turn, tap 2 mana, and I'll cast Dimir Signet, and then I'll tap all the available mana I have to cast Deep Analysis. The cost will be reduced by 1 because of my Nightscape Familiar, and I'll draw 2 cards. After that point, I'll attempt to pass the turn, but before I can, Ajdin will tap 3 using Deathrite to exile my Marsh Flats, and I'll cast Realms Uncharted. He's going to go get Bojuka Bog, Beziju Who Shelters All, Ancient Tomb, and Field of the Dead, give him to Guy, and Guy's going to let him keep Bojuka Bog and Beziju, and bin the rest of the cards. After that point, he'll untap all of his cards, and resolve a Sylvan Library trigger. Ajdin will choose not to take any extra cards off of Sylvan Library, dropping a Spire Garden as his land for turn. He'll tap out, using Deathrite to exile my Wooded Foothills, and cast his Commander. Then he'll play Verdant Catacombs as land for turn, minus his Commander, and he's going to go ahead and grab Field of the Dead and Ancient Tomb, put him into play, triggering Field of the Dead twice. Then he'll try to pass to Jake, who decides to tap 1 blue mana and Mystical Tutor for Nature's Lore. At that point, he'll go ahead and move to his untap, draw the Nature's Lore, and then he will drop Rootbound Crag. And then he's going to cast Nature's Lore, which cost will be reduced by 1 because of Baral Chief of Compliance. He'll get a Triumph into play tapped. Then I'll cast Thrill of Possibility, discarding Rune Chanter's Pike, draw 2 cards, and then pass to Guy, who will draw a card for turn and 1 for Rites of Flourishing. And then I'll tap 3 mana to activate his Thematic Compass, getting a Mountain, putting it into play, and then I'll pass to me. After untapping, I'll draw for turn and 1 off Rites of Flourishing, drop Underground River as land for turn, and then cast Nicol Bolas, God Pharaoh, cost being reduced by 2 because of Nightscape Familiar. Then I'll plus it on Jake. He'll have to exile cards until he hits a non-land, and I can cast it without paying its mana cost, and it's a Reverberate, which is a big punt, so I decided not to cast it. And I'll move to combat, and I'll swing at Guy with my Nightscape Familiar, bringing him down to 38, and I'll pass over to Ajdin. Before I can pass to Ajdin, he's going to go ahead and crack his Verdant Catacombs, and he's going to go get himself a copy of Blood Crypt tapped. That's going to cost him a life. Then he's going to trigger his Field of the Dead and go to untap. He'll resolve his Sylvan Library trigger and Rites of Flourishing, and he'll pay 8 life to keep both of the extra cards he sees off of Sylvan Library. Then Ajdin will play Sword Tooth, losing 2 off of Ancient Tomb, playing Beseiju as land for turn, and Rootbound Crag as his first additional land, triggering field twice, then he'll plus Lord Windgrace, discarding a land to draw 2 cards. At that point, he'll tap 3 mana to play Crucible of Worlds, playing a second extra land drop his turn as Verdant Catacombs. This will trigger Field of the Dead. At that point, he's going to go ahead and tap his Beseiju who shelters all, and 2 other lands to play Harrow. For some reason, he sacrifices 2 lands here. I think this is just a misplay on his part. He goes to get a Swamp and a Forest, triggering Field of the Dead twice, and then he's going to tap 3 more mana, and he's going to cast Cultivate, putting a Mountain into play and getting another basic for his hand, triggering Field an additional time. At that point, he'll attack Nicol Bolas for 6, and he'll pass the turn to Jake. Jake will untap all of his lands, draw a card, and then a card off right, and unfortunately without much to do, he's going to play Manamorphose, floating 2 red and drawing a card. With nothing else to do with the mana, he'll attack my Nicol Bolas for 1 and pass to Guy. Guy's going to go ahead and untap all of his lands, and then he'll draw for turn, and he'll draw off of Rites of Flourishing. At that point, he will drop Castle Garenbrig as his land for turn, tapping all of his available mana, and he'll cast Nissa's Renewal, gain 7 life, and get a Plains, a Forest, and a Mountain into play tapped. That'll flip his Thematic Compass, and I'll pass to me. I'll untap all of my permanents, draw a card for turn, and then 1 off Rites of Flourishing. I'm going to drop 2 lands for turn, and then I'm going to plus my Nicol Bolas. This time I'll target Ajdin. He'll wind up exiling a Kodama's Reach, which I choose to cast. I'm going to go get 2 basics. It's going to be a Swamp into play tapped, and then an Island into my hand. At that point, I'm going to tap all of my mana, and I'm going to cast Worst Fears, targeting Ajdin. So I'm going to take his next turn. And at that point, I'm going to move into combat and hit Guy with my Nightscape Familiar. At that point, I'll try to pass to Ajdin, but before I can take control of his turn, he fetches for a Smoldering Marsh, and then we move to untap. First things first, we'll resolve the Sylvan Library trigger, and I'm going to decide to have him keep all of the cards he picked up and pay 8 life. Then we're going to cast Ob-Nixilis the Fallen. Now, just so everyone knows, every time a land comes into play, we're going to trigger Field of the Dead, so keep that in mind, because there's going to be a lot of land drops. We're going to start with Verdant Catacombs out of the grave, hitting Guy with Ob-Nixilis' trigger. Then we're going to fetch the Verdant Catacombs, we're going to get a Swamp, hitting Guy again with Ob-Nixilis' trigger. After that point, we'll repeat the Verdant Catacombs play. We actually miss this trigger off Ob-Nixilis. We crack the Verdant Catacombs, and we're going to get a Forest. This one we do not miss, and we'll hit Guy for another 3 damage. We're going to redo that play all over again. We're going to deal another damage to Ajdin off of the fetch, and we'll get an Overgrown Tomb into play tapped, hitting Guy with all of the triggers. Then we'll cast Exploration, and we'll play Verdant Catacombs from the graveyard for the 4th time, hitting Guy with that trigger, and then we'll hit Guy with the trigger off of the fetch as well. After grabbing the Stomping Ground off of the Verdant Catacombs and cleaning up the board state just a little bit, we're going to head into combat, and we'll attack Guy with 7 zombies, the Wayward Swordtooth, and Deathrite Shaman. Guy will remove the Swordtooth from combat using Spires of Orazca, and it'll drop to 8. Then we'll -2 Lord Windgrace to grab Verdant Catacombs and Forest, draining Guy for 6 more, and fetch to deal lethal damage to Guy off of Ob-Nixilis. At that point, Ajdin's gotten a little too far ahead on board, so I tap his mana in a way that deals the most damage to him possible, which will be 4, to cast Ugin. In response, Jake sees that Crucible of Worlds is a potential problem, so he casts Force of Vigor to get rid of that and the library. Then we'll -5 the Ugin to wipe everything off of the board except for my Nicol Bolas, lands, and my Dimir Signet. Moving to Jake's turn, he'll just untap all of his lands and draw a card for turn. Then he'll play Steam Vents tapped as his land for turn, casting his commander, and passing to me. I'm going to go ahead and move to my turn 7, untap all of my lands, play my land for turn, and cast Myojin of Night's Reach. Then I will remove the Divinity counter, causing both of my opponents to discard their hands. I'll plus Nicol Bolas on Ajdin, and this time I'll hit Earthcraft, and I will cast the Earthcraft. Then I'll tap my Myojin to untap a basic land using Earthcraft, and I'll pass the turn to Ajdin. Ajdin will untap an insane amount of lands and draw for turn. Then I'll tick up his Ugin, targeting my Nicol Bolas. If that isn't Vorthos, I don't know what is. Then he's going to cast his commander again, and this time he's going to plus his Lord Windgrace to discard a land and draw 2 cards. Ajdin will play Vesuva tapped as his land for turn, copying Field of the Dead. He'll get 2 Field of the Dead triggers and pass to Jake. Jake's going to untap, and he's going to go ahead and kill my Nicol Bolas using his commander. At that point he has no extra game action, so it's going to move on to my turn. I'm going to untap all of my permanents, and then I'm going to draw my card for turn. I'll drop a Swamp as my land for turn, and then I'll tap 2 to flashback Deep Analysis, paying 3 life as an additional cost to the 2 mana to cast it. Then I'll tap Myojin of Night's Reach to untap a basic, and I'm going to float 5 mana and play Hour of Devastation, wiping most of the board. At that point, I'll use the rest of my mana to cast Increasing Ambition, and they don't know this, but I got Dance of the Dead. Then I'll pass to Ajdin. Moving to Ajdin's turn, after he untaps and draws a card, he's going to plus his Lord Windgrace, and he'll discard a non-land, drawing 1 card. At that point, he's going to carefully tap some mana, and he's going to cast Titania. Then he's going to go ahead and play Thespian Stage, and that's going to trigger Field twice because of the copy. And then he's going to tap to activate Thespian Stage and copy Field of the Dead. At that point, he's going to tap 4 mana, and one of them is going to be his Viziju, so he can cast Splendid Reclamation. Splendid Reclamation is going to buy back 7 lands, triggering 3 fields 7 separate times for 21 zombies, and the Bog will exile my graveyard. At that point, he'll pass to Jake. Unfortunately, for the second time this game, Jake has no actions and has to pass to me. So I'll untap, draw for turn, and play Darkwater Catacombs, and then I'm going to cast Damnation to wipe all those zombies off the board. Then I'll cast my commander from the command zone for the second time this game, causing both of my opponents to discard a card. Ajdin will fetch, realize he has no more legal targets in his library, and just move to his turn. Ajdin's going to untap all of his permanents, draw a card, and then he's going to go ahead and minus Lord Windgrace. This is going to buy back a single copy of Verdant Catacombs, triggering all 3 fields, getting 3 zombies. Then I'll pass to Jake, who has an action this turn. He's going to play Soul Ring, and that'll give him enough mana to cast his commander again. At that point, he'll have to pass to me. I'm just going to untap all of my permanents and draw a card for turn. Then I'll play Crumbling Necropolis as my land for turn, and attack Ajdin for 4 with my commander, bringing him down to 2 life. At that point, I'm going to cycle Canyon Slow, paying 2 mana for its cycling cost, and draw a card. Then I'm going to go ahead and tap 3 mana and cast the world's latest Rhystic Study. Can't imagine it's going to have a ton of impact on this game. However, I'm going to tap 4 more mana and play Spark Double, copying my commander, and that's going to trigger and both players are going to discard a card. That might have a little bit more impact on the game. At that point, I'll just pass to Ajdin, who draws a card. Ajdin will tick up Lord Windgrace, deciding not to discard a card, and then he's going to float a green and play Crop Rotation. Now at this point, I don't want Ajdin going to get a Glacial Chasm, so I'm going to go ahead and tap my Spark Double to Earthcraft to untap a basic land, and then I'll tap out and cast Insidious Will, countering Crop Rotation. At that point, Ajdin needs to move into combat, so he swings at me for 6 with all 3 zombies. This will bring me down to 27 life, and that's the last action he has per turn, so he passes to Jake. Jake's in top deck mode, and unfortunately he top decks a copy of Thousand Year Storm. He'll pay 1 mana to pay for the Rhystic Study, and then he'll just pass to me. I'm going to go ahead and untap a whole bunch of mana, and I'll draw my card for turn. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and move into combat, and I'm going to attack Jake with my 5/5 and Ajdin with my 4/4. This will bring Jake to 34 and kill Ajdin. Then we'll tap 3 mana and play Dak Faden. I'm going to go ahead and decide to use the looting ability, so I'll draw 2 and discard 2 off of Dak Faden, and I decided to drop Rakdos Signet and Shaholdred Whispering One. After that point, I'm going to tap 2 mana and cast that Dance of the Dead that I picked up off of the Increasing Ambition, and that's going to put my Shaholdred right back into play. Then I can just pass to Jake, who has to untap, and we resolve the Shaholdred trigger. He's going to have to sacrifice his commander, and he draws a card. It's a migration path. He sees the writing on the walls and concedes. Victory by concession is probably one of my favorite ways to win a game of Magic, period. But it's especially satisfying to win by concession in a game of Commander. Let's just go ahead and run through how everyone's decks did and maybe shine some light on some things that may have not been so obvious in the game. I don't know. Let's start with, I did want to start with, there was a comment on the last video about a play with Imprisoned in the Moon. And it was just addressing that it probably wouldn't have changed anything because Jake, who was casting it, could have just asked the question, what are your intentions with that Imprisoned in the Moon? I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of your YouTube handle, but you know who you are. You commented on the video that Guy won with Niv Mizzet. And that normally I would completely agree with you. That just varies from Commander Pod to Commander Pod. So in our pod, we don't use a whole lot of politics with our, my immediate circle of people I play with regularly. So we play pretty textbook. We don't really there's not a whole lot of hey, what are you going to use that spell for if it resolves? This comes up from time to time, but typically we play the way you would just play a 60 card format like Standard or Modern, Pioneer, whatever. And we don't always do this, but in that particular game, that's kind of how we were handling the game itself, which is why I wanted to shine light on that Imprisoned in the Moon play. Anyway, on to this game. Jake's deck didn't really do anything. Unfortunately, he got to hand with 2 lands. His hand looked overall pretty good, but without a red source. He couldn't even start off by casting that Thrill of Possibility. So his game plan kind of fell apart. His deck, we do have some more games already recorded, ready to come out. That Kalamax deck is actually one of the stronger decks I've seen in our pod. It's certainly one of his strongest decks, period. He wins a handful of games that we play off screen with it, and he may or may not win some games that we have coming out very soon as well. And then you had Guy. I want to talk about him in a little more detail, so we'll just move straight over to Ajdin, who was playing Lord Windgrace. and his deck was running on all cylinders. He probably would have won that game if I hadn't taken his turn 6. There's really not a whole lot to say about that. I just saw an opportunity. Ajdin was very far ahead. He had just a demanding board presence. He was able to generate a ton of value in a turn. So by targeting him with Worst Fears, I was able to basically use him to kill Guy, which is like the most Nicol Bolas thing ever. I was really happy with that play. And then I even got to use his own Ugin to kind of self-destruct after building his board state up to this monstrous kind of, like 40 zombies, and he's got 1 billion lands. So that was pretty great. I think he would have probably won the game hadn't I cast that Worst Fears targeting him. And then there was me. So Nicol Bolas is a newer deck to my pod of decks. I'm really happy with it. Its construction is based just on Vorthos. So if you guys want to see a deck tech on Nicol Bolas, I'd be happy to do one. There's probably going to be one coming out regardless, but if you guys do want to see it, let me know. It might come out sooner than later. And then I wanted to talk about Guy a little bit, and maybe why I made sure he died on turn 6. Anyone who's played the Zacama or has a Zacama deck in their pod, they might already know, but there's a few cards that combo with Zacama that I had no way to know if he had. I think Emergent Zone is the one I'm thinking of. It combos with Zacama. So when he plays Zacama, he gets to untap all his lands, and he can float them and use the Emergent Zone to bounce Zacama to his hand. And since Zacama's in his hand, he can now cast it again, repeating that loop over and over, and he's able to gain infinite life and destroy basically every type of permanent except for land all at once, which is going to put him very firmly ahead of everybody else. And I knew that he was going to be able to cast Zacama next turn, so with no way to know whether he had access to his combo pieces or not, I absolutely had to kill him for my spot. I've died to that exact Zacama deck a few times by just going, oh, it's fine, we'll give him a couple more turns, and then you're dead on the next turn. So yeah, I think most of the decks did what they wanted to do. The Kalamax deck, not so much. It was a pretty entertaining game to play. Hopefully it was entertaining to watch. And all of these decks I can get deck techs on if anyone would like to see them. So please do let me know. And yeah, we'll try to get better about not missing triggers. We did miss a few landfall triggers off Nicholas. And I did miss some discards off of Nicol Bolas. I don't even know if people are super interested in having all of that information. What people discarded off of late game Nicol Bolas triggers and stuff. But if you are, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I'm still kind of working out how I want to do these gameplay videos. The gameplay videos aren't even the real reason I started this channel, but I enjoy making this content, because I enjoy watching all the people who are putting out EDH gameplay content. MTG Mudsta, Command Zone, there's a newer one, Casually Competitive. There's a lot of them. There's a ton of great Commander channels. So I'm just trying to put my 2 cents in. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.